So thank you for your presence and interest to be a part of this discussion with Mr. David Phillips. Usually, political parties be more inclusive to different ideas, to think out of our box, instead of talking and listening only to each other. LDK Department of Foreign Policy started a series of discussions on different issues on foreign policy and diplomacy. As for EU, Middle East dialogue, and will continue to be open and inclusive for all. Today we are honored to have among us Mr. David Phillips, L. Phillips. My good friend from New York, a good friend of President Rugova, and a true friend of Kosovo. The topic of today's discussion will be strengthening Kosovo's sovereignty and independence. In 2008, Kosovo declared independence. We had a lot of recognitions, but in recent years, the number of recognitions dropped heavily and even started with some issues of derecognitions, although that does not exist in diplomacy as a notion. Interest of our partners were lower intensity, and after Washington agreement last year, the increase of the level of interest was seen, and we are in a time that dialogue needs to be finalized. I will briefly, in some sentence, tell about Mr. Phillips, although I know that a lot of you know him. David L. Phillips is currently director of the program on peace building and rights at Columbia University Institute for Study on Human Rights. Philip has worked as a senior advisor to the United Nations Secretariat and as a foreign affairs expert and senior advisor to the U.S. Department of State. He has held position of a visiting scholar at Harvard University, Center of Middle East Studies, executive director at Columbia University, International Conflict Resolution Program, Director of Program of Conflict Prevention and Peace Building at the American University, Associate Professor at New York University, and many others. I think that you will find more whenever you type his name in Google. Mr. Philip has a broad knowledge about developments in Kosovo, in our region, and in foreign affairs globally. He's the author of many publications, including the one about Kosovo, Liberating Kosovo. The discussion is in English, and Mr. Philip will have a presentation on an issue, on the topics, and then the debate will be open. Mr. Phillips, welcome to Kosovo again, and the floor is yours.
Tryezë, thank you for your warm welcome and your introduction. Thank you all for coming to the discussion today. I'm going to make some remarks, and then I hope we have a chance for questions and answers and some discussion. I'm going to focus my intervention on the Kosovo-Serbia dialogue. I'm going to make some recommendations and observations. And hopefully during this year, we can reach a point where there is a full and final agreement between Kosovo and Serbia that results in mutual recognition, something which is long overdue and an outcome to which we all aspire. I have the good fortune of interacting extensively with Marty Ahtisaari. I spent some hours interviewing him for my book, Liberating Kosovo, and he made a couple of important observations that I'll share during my discussion today. First, he said that he never entered into a negotiation where he didn't know the outcome. That's important because we've had this Kosovo-Serbia dialogue now for a decade. As far as I know, we've never set the agenda. What are we meeting to talk about? What's the outcome of these many meetings in Brussels? Is there transparency? What can we rely on going forward? In order to have a successful negotiation, we should be clear what our goals are. And it's simple. Our goals are independence, sovereignty, and mutual recognition. The details of bilateral issues can be addressed, but unless Serbia is prepared to recognize that it lost Kosovo because of Milosevic's crimes, we're not going to be able to move forward. And we're going to find that there is still misunderstanding and potential conflict in this region. Now, there's been a lot of talk in Brussels. There have been 33 agreements that have been reached over the years. I conducted a study at Columbia University, an implementation review on the Kosovo-Serbia dialogue. And what I found was that those agreements were not fully implemented, and the failure to implement them lay almost entirely on the Serbian side. Rather than address the core issues of recognizing Kosovo's independence as setting the stage for mutual recognition, Serbia entered into this dialogue, in my view, not to find solutions, but as a delaying tactic, as a way of postponing the inevitable, which is full recognition by the international community of the Republic of Kosovo. It's important to study the existing agreements. We don't want to reinvent them, but we also shouldn't be bogged down by small details. The 33 agreements are a good start, but they don't represent the end point. In fact, those agreements probably should have been put forward after Kosovo and Serbia had reached a full agreement on mutual recognition. Mr. Vucic's strategy is delay. He's playing a long game. In my view, he hopes that the international community will simply lose interest, stop paying attention, and then Serbia can go about its business, reasserting its prominence in the region and its control over Kosovo. This long game is going nowhere. There are emotional issues in Kosovo that have to be addressed. I met with a mother in Jakova whose son went missing during the war. What happened to the more than 1,600 missing persons? What kind of compensation will there be to families who lost their children? What about properties that were destroyed? We have to address these issues, and we should address them soon. They shouldn't occur at the end of a dialogue. They should occur at the beginning of a dialogue. Now, I took information about this mother's son to the Ministry of Interior in Serbia. And they're well-trained diplomats. They tried to be nice, but they made no genuine effort to find the mortal remains of this young man. So we must recognize that Serbia's approach isn't to find a solution, it's to delay a solution. Its goal, ultimately, is to reassert its control, both functionally, legally, and in security terms over Kosovo. And that's not going to happen. Nor will Kosovo be forgotten by the international community. Somebody told me today that Kosovo is like the 51st state of the United States. There's a special relationship that exists between Albanians and Americans. That special relationship isn't going away. The United States isn't going to ignore the plight of Kosovo, and President Biden is fully familiar about the details in this part of the world. He knows the issues. I believe there's a street in Kosovo named after his son, Bo Biden. The U.S. wants you to succeed. He wants a mutual agreement so that both Kosovo and Serbia can move forward, so there can be peace and prosperity for the peoples of both countries. Now, what's the architecture for mediation? The EU is the primary mediator. There are always U.S. officials in the room. In my view, the U.S. needs to upgrade its participation. These meetings shouldn't be attended by an assistant secretary or a deputy assistant secretary. it would be useful for President Biden to designate a special presidential envoy in order to raise the temperature on these discussions, make them more serious and more results-oriented. I also have some questions about the EU's credibility as a mediator. If the EU wants to demonstrate a sincere desire to help Kosovo, then what's happened with EU visa liberalization? Why is this discussion going on for years without result? Mr. Lajčák, who I've hosted at Columbia University, is a nice man. He's a competent diplomat. He's also a Slovak. And we know that Slovakia is one of the 5 non-recognizers. So can we really expect the EU to put pressure on Serbia to recognize Kosovo and move this process forward? Only the U.S. has the capacity to compel an agreement, to enforce an agreement, and through its diplomacy and mediation to join in transatlantic cooperation to send a very clear message to Belgrade. Enough is enough. This process must conclude. It must conclude with justice for the people of Kosovo. Unless we get to that point, Serbia itself can't develop as a society. And we all want this part of the world to move forward so that there is progress and cooperation, and so the U.S. can strengthen its alliances, first and foremost with the Republic of Kosovo, but with all countries in the region. I'm glad to say that there's been some recent progress. You had a visit here recently by Greece's foreign minister. Looks as though the Republic of Kosovo will be able to upgrade its representation in Athens. This is long overdue. It's also important that Kosovo focus on other Euro-Atlantic institutions as a byproduct of its negotiations, especially membership with NATO. I had the chance to speak this morning with the Minister of Defense, who's an extremely capable individual. It's time for the pace of Kosovo's 10-year integration plan to pick up, for Partnership for Peace to move forward, and for Kosovo to achieve its Euro-Atlantic aspirations. George Mitchell mediated the Good Friday Agreement for Northern Ireland. And after weeks of negotiation, he told the parties, if you don't have an agreement by midnight tomorrow, I'm going home. The mediators shouldn't sit in the room waiting forever. There needs to be a deadline. A deadline compels action, and action will ultimately result in mutual recognition. So we need a timetable. This next week, on the 15th, there will be another round of discussions in Brussels. I hope that the Kosovo delegation makes it very clear that it's prepared to continue the dialogue, because discussion is always better than conflict. But frankly, there are other priorities that Kosovo has to address. It doesn't need to beg for Serbia's recognition. It should not. It should focus on questions of state capture and state building so that the quality of life for Kosovars, for Kosovo Albanians, can be improved. So what are the goals that Kosovo needs to pursue that are complementary to mutual recognition with Serbia? Pretty straightforward. The people of Kosovo want jobs, they want justice, and we're all affected worldwide by this pandemic, so we need to beat the virus and we need to establish a healthy environment so that we can start to interact more normally, more constructively. We want democracy to flourish here. Kosovo has multifaceted goals. Democracy and the rule of law are necessary parts of that agenda. It also needs an economic plan so that its dependence on foreign aid and foreign remittances are reduced, and so Kosovo's economy can develop. This isn't going to be a 20th century economy. based on traditional industries and manufacturing. It should be a high-tech economy, using technology as a tool for advancing the overall well-being and prosperity of society. In addition to that, we need a clean energy economy. The era of coal is over. It's crazy to think that we're going to revert to these traditional technologies. We need new technologies and we need clean energy. There's also a regional economic infrastructure, and Kosovo should be a part of that. I sponsored a project some years ago called the Albanian Neighborhood, and we decided that it's entirely normal for Albanians in Albania, in Kosovo, and elsewhere to interact, to share their common values, their common interests, to do business together, to work collaboratively on education and cultural initiatives. So we want to see that move forward, reintegration into the regional economy. And it's great that Kosovo is developing new international partners. I published a piece in the Jerusalem Post a couple of weeks before Kosovo was recognized by Israel. Israel is a dynamic economy with high-tech capabilities, and I'd like to see more Israeli delegations coming here and greater cooperation between Kosovo and Israel. Now, at the so-called Washington Agreement, which was really not an agreement at all, it was a series of parallel declarations without any monitoring or enforcement mechanisms, it was decided that Kosovo would wait a year until September before it pursued membership in international organizations and recognition bilaterally by other states. I don't know why we should wait till September, but it's summer and we know that the Europeans are interested in their vacation, so they're not going to be working hard. I'm a New Yorker. We never take a vacation. We work in service of the goals and the partners that we cherish. So Kosovo needs to redouble its efforts on membership in international organizations. It needs to develop coalitions, it needs to work creatively, and it needs to have patience. And those are the three watchwords that Marty Adesari reminded me of. There's a term that's often used in the international conflict resolution field about intractable conflicts. The idea being that there are some problems that are just too big, too serious, you can't solve them. Well, you can solve them if there's political will, and you exert those three principles: creativity, you build coalitions, and you work with patience, but patience is not unending. We need to have an outcome. We need to get to the point where Kosovo is able to address its state-building goals, where we have mutual recognition with Serbia, where Kosovo gets integrated into the regional economy, and once and for all, Kosovo is able to move forward. The UÇK didn't fight for Kosovo's liberation to become a vassal state of Serbia. Recognition by Serbia is desirable, but it's not the end-all. There are other opportunities for regional and international cooperation. And I hope that these points are made very clear by your Prime Minister when he meets with Mr. Vučić on the 15th. Kosovo is prepared to show goodwill to Serbia, is prepared to work cooperatively, but frankly, this patience needs to be limited. If Serbia isn't showing a commitment to resolving its bilateral issues with the Republic of Kosovo as a sovereign and independent state, then it must recognize that Chapter 35 will prevent Serbia from any kind of European integration. I'd like to know where Mr. Vučić keeps his bank accounts in Cyprus and elsewhere, and if he continues to act in an obstructionist fashion, those bank accounts should be frozen. The White House recently issued a decree about corruption. Does anybody in this room think that Mr. Vučić isn't a corrupt official? Of course he is. Just look at the clothes he wears. He's a very well-dressed guy. He spent a lot of money dressing up and making his appearance suitable for the international community. It's time that Serbia pay a price for its obstruction. And frankly, the only country that's going to require Serbia to pay a price is the United States. The U.S. believes in transatlantic cooperation. That's one of the hallmarks of President Biden's foreign policy. But transatlantic cooperation is not intended to replace American leadership. And American leadership can be realized through the designation of a U.S. presidential envoy. That's going to make it very clear to all of the parties what we expect, what the rewards will be, and what punishments will be due if either side, especially Serbia, continues to obstruct development in this region. So I've been working on issues concerning Kosovo for 30 years. I was here for your Independence Day. I was here when Belgrade declared martial law and beat up protesters in front of the Grand Hotel. I had the honor of working with Ambassador Holbrooke, advancing Kosovo's national aspirations and its recognition and NATO's intervention to defend Kosovo from Serbia's aggression, so we will not see what happened in Bosnia happen here. And I have to say that it has been my honor to work in partnership with the Kosovo nation. It's my privilege as a former U.S. official and now as an academic to think about and critique the current situation. But I also have limits of my patience. I don't want to have this same discussion next year, next 10 years. I want this issue resolved fully and finally. It's high time. Time has passed. And Kosovo needs to make clear to the international community that it's not going to act passively. It will be proactive through its negotiations with Serbia, but also through its state building and eliminating problems of state capture that exist with former politicians from here. So one of the most rewarding things I've done in my career has been working with Albanians. I continue to. This is a high priority for me. It's a high priority for the United States. I know you all care deeply about Kosovo realizing its sovereignty and independence through mutual recognition with Serbia. And please be assured that the true friends of Kosovo stand with you in solidarity and will do whatever we can to realize those goals. So I'm grateful to Teuta and to the LDK for inviting me. I'm not a member of any political party in Kosovo. I don't endorse or support any political party, but I knew Dr. Rugova extremely well. I have great respect and strong feelings of friendship and admiration for him, as I do for many of my Albanian friends. I'm very happy that you all took time out of your busy schedules to come here today, and I want you to be assured of my continued friendship and engagement. So thank you all very much. Faleminderit.
Thank you, David. You touched many epochs and many topics of this ongoing dialogue and ongoing unsolved relation with Serbia. I don't want to take time from others, so the discussion is open, and you are welcome to ask, to comment, to discuss about this, what we said. So,
happy to take any questions that you all have, so fire away. When you ask a question, could you identify yourself by name and institution? Sir.
Muhammad Hamiti, LDK, professor at the University of Pristina. I worked with President Rugova Mati for the first time, I believe, in 1993, 3 decades ago, and of course we appreciate your involvement and work with Albanians that you pointed out in these past 3 everything. Well, I would like to just see your take on the Washington agreements, or whatever you call them. You call them parallel declarations, I believe. Of course, one of the results of that is also the recognition of Kosovo by Israel, which is a great thing. Yes, there's been this 1 year pause in pursuit of recognition, but this has not meant and doesn't mean lack of preparations, or, shall I say, inactivity on the part of the institutions towards recognitions, also membership as of September in multilateral organizations. Now, the Biden administration, as far as I can tell, has not been as critical of the Washington agreement or commitments. Moreover, it has suggested that both Kosovo and Serbia, and in this case with the United States, should work and build on this. That is.
Well, I'm glad you qualify the term agreement, because there was no agreement. The best thing that come out of that visit to Washington was the Trump administration's mediation with Israel that resulted in Israel's commitment to recognize Kosovo. But let's be crystal clear. That whole trip to Washington was just a publicity stunt by President Trump in order to reach out to Albanian American voters and try to persuade them to support it. There was nothing meaningful or substantive. A more experienced delegation from here would have been cautious and would not have allowed itself to be manipulated for U.S. domestic political purposes. The pause of a year happened to coincide with this COVID period. Probably not a lot would have happened anyhow, but the pause is over. COVID is getting under control. I've gotten my vaccine. I hope you all get yours soon. It's time to get back to work. We need to find practical ways for Kosovo and Serbia to work together. We need to find ways that the U.S. can be an effective mediator and interlocutor. This has gone on for too long. It's just more wasted time. And the other thing that I want to talk about when it comes to wasted time was this ridiculous proposal for territorial exchange that Mr. Vučić, Mr. Thaci, and Edi Rama cooked up. Whoever thought about this idea? The whole problem with conflict in the Balkans was because of ethnically pure states. We want to have pluralist, multi-party democracies here. We don't want to have ethnically pure states that are a formula for failure and conflict. So we wasted a lot of time debating partition. I was a part of that debate. I think some of you know that I was a consultant to the foreign minister. I was advising the government of Kosovo on its negotiations with Serbia. I said crystal clear from the beginning that the partition plan of Mr. Thaci was a bogus idea. There have been many attempts to revive it. It should die and remain in the dustbin of history. There's no place in Kosovo or anywhere for partition that creates an ethnically pure state. So we wasted more time with that. So we need to pick up the pace. We need to set a deadline. Just like George Mitchell said with the Good Friday Agreement. If you don't reach a deal by midnight, I'm going home. And that should be the case here. We should give this calendar year to reach an agreement. Frankly, it's not complicated. We all know what the final outcome looks like. It's just about political will. And we also know that the EU mediators are not going to leverage or put pressure on Serbia to make concessions. If the U.S. is serious about serving Kosovo, the country for which it went to war, it's time for the U.S. to upgrade its participation, to appoint a special presidential envoy, and to be seated in the table, and to be consistently involved in all aspects of diplomacy. That's how we'll get to a deal by the end of this calendar year.
Thank you, David. Although I think that President Biden endorsed the Washington Agreement and they ask for fulfilling. And
So
about
let me disagree with that. I don't think he
about-
ever referred to it as a Washington Agreement. I saw no statement endorsing it. He endorsed dialogue, and he endorsed concessions towards mutual agreement. So let's not put words in
And,
President Biden's mouth and try to manipulate him. He is your friend. Don't allow individuals to somehow turn him against the people of Kosovo.
No, definitely not. And we as LDK were definitely against swap of territories